I'm 31 years old and I have never told anyone this story in full. Not my closest friend, not my therapist, not even my mum, who somehow still thinks that dinner ended with me getting a lovely tour of a cottage in Muskoka. It did not end that way. I should back up. For almost 2 years, the man I was falling in love with believed I worked as a junior coordinator at a mid sized event planning company in Toronto. That part was technically true. What he didn't know, what I never corrected him on, was that I also owned 40% of that company. That I had co founded it at 24 with two friends from Ryerson. That we'd grown it from a shared Google Doc and a lot of cold calls into something that regularly put tents on the lawns of film festival after parties and corporate treats in Banff. That in most months, after expenses and taxes, I was clearing somewhere around $22,000. That the basement apartment in Leslieville where I hung my coat and made my coffee every morning was not the extent of my life. It was a deliberate choice, a quiet place I loved, in a neighborhood I'd chosen because it felt real. He never asked, and I never offered. That's not as simple as it sounds. There's a version of me that could explain it as caution, as wisdom, as something my grandmother used to say about showing people your whole hand before you know what game they're playing. But honestly, I think I was just tired. Tired of men who changed the second they understood what I was. Tired of the way a room shifts when certain numbers enter it. So, I let things be what they were. I split the bill. I wore the same rotation of Aritzia basics and a pair of Blundstones I'd had since 2019. I didn't talk about the Canmore client or the $250,000 venue contract we just signed. I was just me, 31, coffee dependent, slightly obsessed with true crime podcasts and the perfect soft-boiled egg, and he seemed to love that person just fine. He was kind in the particular way that's hard to fake over time. He remembered things. He noticed when I was tired before I said so. He drove 40 minutes in January traffic to bring me soup when I had a chest cold, and he didn't make it a whole thing, which, if you've ever dated someone who made every small gesture into a whole thing, you'll understand why that mattered. We'd been together for 8 months when he started talking about the future. 11 months when he first mentioned his parents. He mentioned them the way people mention a dental appointment, necessary, slightly dreaded, over before you know it. They're a bit formal, he said. My mum especially. She has a way of. She just needs to warm up to people. It takes her a while. I told him that was fine, that I understood, that I was good with formal. I grew up with a grandmother who ironed her tea towels. I know how to sit straight and say the right things. He looked at me with something I couldn't read and said, Yeah, I know. I want it to go well. I should have paid more attention to that look. I catalogued it and filed it away under things I'd understand later. We drove up on a Saturday in late October. His family had a property about 90 minutes north of the city. Not a cottage, exactly, more of a second house, which is how his mother referred to it on the phone when she called to confirm the time. The second house. I remember thinking that phrase was doing a lot of work. The drive was fine. We talked about a podcast we'd both been listening to, argued mildly about whether a particular host was annoying or just committed to the bit, stopped at a Tim Hortons outside of Berry where I got a large double-double and he got something the barista had to read off the cup 3 times. It felt normal. It felt like us. The property was beautiful. That I'll say without qualification. The house sat back from the water on a lot with old maples that had gone full October, and in the evening light everything looked like someone had turned the saturation up by 30%. I noticed he exhaled when we pulled into the driveway. Not a relaxed exhale. A held breath released one. His mother opened the door before we reached it. She was precisely the kind of woman who does that, who positions herself so she's always already there, already composed, already having formed her first impression before you fully arrived. She was dressed in a way that communicated money without announcing it. Cream knit, dark trousers, a single bracelet. She was probably 60, looked 55. and had the kind of handshake that's really more of an assessment. "So, this is her," she said to him while looking at me. "Not hello, not lovely to meet you. So, this is her." He said my name. She smiled with exactly the right muscles. His father came around the corner with more warmth, not effusive but genuine. The kind of man who has decided a long time ago to let his wife run the social operations and to concentrate on being pleasant in the background. He shook my hand with both of his and said he'd heard good things, and I believed him. There was a brother, visiting from Calgary, who was easy and funny in the way younger brothers often are when they haven't yet inherited the weight of family expectation. He made a joke about the drive that I laughed at for real. We sat down for dinner. I want to be honest about this part. For the first hour, it was fine. It was stiff, and his mother asked questions with the particular technique of someone who is performing interest while actually auditing. But the food was good, a roast, real vegetables, the kind of meal that takes planning, and the conversation moved. His father asked about the events industry with what seemed like genuine curiosity. His brother told a story about a disastrous camping trip that took over the table for a good 10 minutes. And then his mother said something. She didn't say it to me. She said it to her husband in the particular register that people use when they want you to hear something but want deniability about whether they meant for you to hear it. She said something about how it was lovely that the industry had opportunities for people who were still finding their footing. Still finding their footing. I kept eating. I have excellent control of my face when I need to. It's a skill I developed early and have maintained carefully. But I heard it, and she knew I heard it, and I think she wanted me to. The meal ended. His brother helped clear. His father suggested a walk down to the water before it got too dark. While the two of them got their coats on, I offered to help in the kitchen. Because that is what I do. Because my mother raised me to do that. And also because kitchens tell you things. His mother accepted the offer with a graciousness that didn't reach her eyes. We were in there maybe 4 minutes before the conversation happened. The real one, she didn't waste time. I'll give her that. She set down a serving dish and she looked at me directly and she said that she wanted to be honest with me because she thought I seemed like a sensible girl who could handle honest conversation. She said that her son had a very particular future ahead of him, that there were responsibilities that came with their family. She named a business, a real estate portfolio that had been in the family for 3 generations, partnerships with people who had expectations about the kind of life her son would build. She said that she wasn't suggesting I wasn't perfectly nice. That was her word. Nice. But that nice and suited were 2 different things, and she believed in being clear. I said nothing for long enough that she started to look uncertain. Then I said, "I appreciate you being direct with me." She nodded, reassured. I finished drying the pan and handed it back to her, and I smiled, the way my grandmother taught me, warm but unreadable, and I said, "The roast was excellent. You should be proud." She didn't know what to do with that. We went to join the others. The drive home was quiet in a specific way. He kept his eyes on the highway and his hands at exactly 10 and 2, and he didn't say anything for almost 30 minutes. I watched the dark trees and the occasional exit signs, and I thought about what had just happened in that kitchen, and I made a decision. Not about revenge. I want to be clear about that. Because I've told parts of this story to a few people since, and the word that keeps coming up is revenge, and I don't think it's the right word. What I made a decision about was clarity, about what I was willing to carry and what I wasn't, about whether the man sitting next to me was going to be someone I could actually build something real with, or whether he was going to spend our life together requiring me to manage the feelings of a woman who had just told me, without irony, that I wasn't suited. I needed to know who he was. Not just who he was with me, who he was with them. I didn't say any of this. I asked him how he thought the evening went. He said, "I think it went okay." I said, "Okay." We didn't talk about it again that week, or the next. I went back to work on Monday and sat in our glass-walled boardroom and signed off on a contract for a spring gala at the Fairmont and ate my lunch and called my co-founder Bex and told her nothing because I was still working through what I knew. Here's what I knew. I knew that the future his mother had outlined, the family business, the portfolio, the partnerships with their expectations, was real and not small. I knew that a woman who says what she said in a kitchen 4 minutes after being left alone with you does not change her view easily or quietly. I knew that the question wasn't whether she liked me. The question was what my boyfriend was prepared to do about the fact that she didn't. I also knew something she didn't, and I was starting to think it mattered. About a month later, he told me he'd said something to his mother, that he'd been clear with her about how he felt about me. He didn't give me the details of the conversation, and I didn't push for them. He said, "I want you to know I'm on your side." And he looked at me with such openness when he said it that I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was knotted. I believed him. I still believe he meant it. But meaning it and doing it are different skills, and one of them takes practice. His mother invited us for Christmas. I know what you're thinking. But he wanted to go, and I wanted to understand what had changed, if anything had, and so I said yes. The Christmas visit was at the main house, in the family's neighborhood in North Toronto, the kind of street where the houses are old enough to have character and large enough to have staff. There were more people this time, an aunt and uncle, two cousins, a family friend his mother introduced as someone who had known them for years, a woman about my age named, well, I'll just say she was warm with his parents in a specific way, an easy familiarity that made it clear she'd been in that house many times. I watched this woman with his family. I watched how his mother touched her arm when she laughed. I watched how his father asked about her job. She worked in commercial real estate with the particular interest of someone who is not just making conversation. I watched the cousin lean over to the other cousin and say something that made them both glance at me. I've been in enough rooms to know when I'm being compared to something. After dinner, I excused myself to use the washroom and took the long route back. It was not deliberate, exactly, but I was in a hallway I didn't need to be in when I heard his mother's voice from behind a half-open door. She wasn't speaking quietly. She had the confidence of someone who assumed no one of consequence was in the hall. She was talking to the aunt. She was saying that the situation was temporary, that her son had a tendency to get attached to people who weren't quite right for him, that it had happened before and she had every expectation it would resolve itself. She said the other woman, the one in real estate, had been extraordinarily patient, that her family and theirs had an understanding, that she expected the new year would bring some clarity, an understanding. I stood in that hallway for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then I went back to the living room, sat down next to him, accepted a piece of shortbread from his aunt, and talked about Boxing Day sales with his cousin for 20 minutes, because that is the kind of person I am when I need to be. On the drive home, he asked if I'd had a good time. I said it was a beautiful house. Both of those things were true. He reached over and held my hand, and I looked out the passenger window at the city lights. I had a decision to make. Not about him. I knew who I wanted him to be, and I wasn't sure yet whether he was going to choose to be that person. What I had to decide was whether I was going to ask him directly what he knew, or whether I was going to create a situation where what was true had to come to the surface on its own. I'm not proud of choosing the second option, but I did. I want to explain something about the next 2 months because I think it's the part that people have the most complicated feelings about. I did not set out to humiliate anyone. I did not make a plan. What I did was simply stop correcting the impression that had been formed. I kept going to his family events as myself, my actual self, in my Blundstones and my practical coat and my tendency to order the second cheapest wine on the list because I genuinely prefer it. I accepted every small condescension with the patience I had to work to maintain. I listened to his mother describe her son's future as though I were a minor obstacle in it. I watched the woman from real estate appear at 2 more gatherings, always warm, always welcomed, always positioned like a piece of furniture that was waiting to be moved into a more permanent spot. And I waited. He proposed in February, on a Tuesday, which is not when people are supposed to propose. But he'd made dinner at his apartment, and there was a terrible amount of snow outside, and the whole thing was so completely unplanned and imperfect and real that when I looked at the ring, I started crying before I'd made a conscious decision to. I said yes. I want to be clear. I said yes because I loved him and believed he loved me, and because a proposal on a snowy Tuesday with burnt garlic bread on the counter is exactly the kind of proposal I had always, without admitting it to anyone, wanted. But I also knew that the people who had an understanding were not going to take this quietly. And I thought, now is the moment to stop letting a story be told about me without my voice in it. I called Bex the next morning. I told her everything: the kitchen conversation, the hallway, the woman in real estate, the understanding. Bex listened the way she always does, which is completely silently until you're done. And then she said, "So, what do you want to do?" I said I wanted his family to know who they'd actually been underestimating. And I wanted my fiancé to be the one who told them, not me. So I told him all of it: the company, the numbers, the ownership stake, why I'd never brought it up. I showed him the financials because I didn't want him to have to take my word for it. I watched his face move through things: surprise, confusion, something that looked briefly like hurt, and then settle into something quieter. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I needed to know you wanted the person I am without it." There was a very long silence. Outside his window, someone was shoveling their walk. He said, "And the dinner at my parents' in October? What did my mother say to you?" I told him. I told him about the kitchen and the hallway and Christmas. I told him about the woman his parents had in mind, and the understanding, and all the polite and not so polite ways his family had spent several months suggesting I wasn't enough. He sat with that for a long time. Then he called his mother. I didn't listen to the call. I went into the kitchen and made tea and looked out at the snow and gave him the room to be whoever he was going to be. That's the thing I've never heard anyone talk about in stories like this: the moment before you know. The moment where someone is either going to show you who they are or they're not. I heard his voice through the door. I couldn't make out words, but I could hear the tone. It wasn't a long call. It wasn't a smooth one. He came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter across from me. He said, "I didn't know about the understanding. I want you to know that." I said I believed him. He said, "I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that it took this long, and I'm embarrassed that I let myself not see it." I said that was a reasonable thing to feel. We were both quiet for a minute. The kettle finished, and I poured the water. He said, "What do you want to happen now?" And that question, the fact that he asked it that way, that the answer was mine to give, is what made me decide he was going to be okay, that we were going to be okay. What I wanted was simple. I wanted to go to the next family dinner. There was one coming, an engagement dinner his mother had already begun planning because she didn't know yet that the conversation had happened, and I wanted to attend it as myself, my full self, not to make a scene, not to ruin anything, just to stop being a diminished version of the person I actually was and let the truth take up the space it was owed. He agreed. He asked if he could be the one to speak first. I said yes. The dinner was at a restaurant in Yorkville, a place his mother had chosen that was a precise kind of expensively understated that communicates confidence in one's own taste. There were 12 people. The woman from real estate was not there. I found out later that his mother had quietly disinvited her after the phone call, which told me everything I needed to know about what she'd understood. We arrived together, and I was wearing a dress I'd owned for 3 years that cost more than most people spend on a month of groceries. Not because I wanted to signal anything, but because I'd bought it for a gala in 2022, and it was a remarkable dress, and I liked it. My fiancé had my hand and held it like he meant to. His mother saw us come in and smiled her assembled smile and rose to kiss me on the cheek, which was new. We sat down. Wine was poured. Menus opened. And then my fiancé cleared his throat and said he wanted to say something before they ordered. Because there were some things about his fiancée that he realized he'd never properly shared, and he thought it was time they understood a bit better who she was. He spoke for about 4 minutes. He was careful and specific. He mentioned the company, the founding story, the scale of it. He mentioned some of the clients. Not to impress, but to be concrete. He said that he was enormously proud of me and that he wanted his family to have the opportunity to know me as I actually was, because he was planning on marrying me and he hoped they'd want to be part of that. I watched his mother's face during this. I have thought about her expression many times since. It wasn't embarrassment exactly, it was something more complicated. The face of someone doing very fast internal calculations while holding a menu perfectly still. His father said, "Well, that's wonderful," and he seemed to mean it. The aunt looked at me with something that had shifted into genuine curiosity. The cousin, the one who had made the comment at Christmas, had the grace to look at her bread. His mother set down her menu. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said that she hadn't realized the full scope of what I'd built and that she found it impressive. It wasn't an apology. I wasn't an equating one, and I didn't need one. I needed her to understand that the story she'd been telling herself was wrong, and the expression on her face told me she was already rewriting it. That was enough. More than enough. We ordered dinner. The conversation moved. By the time the mains came, his uncle was asking me genuinely good questions about scaling a service business, because he'd run one himself, and we talked for 20 minutes about operations and partnerships, while my fiancé watched from across the table with a look I've since seen many times. Quiet. Certain, a little like coming home. I won't tell you it was all easy after that. It wasn't. There were moments, over the following months, when I could feel his mother recalibrating in real time, deciding what to do with a version of me that didn't fit the story. There were dinners that were awkward, and one particular conversation about wedding planning where I had to remind myself twice that I had chosen these people on purpose, which meant I had to choose them when they were difficult too. But there was also the afternoon, about 4 months before our wedding, when his mother called me. Not to discuss logistics, just to call. She said she'd been thinking about something, and she wanted me to know she admired how I'd handled the first year. She didn't spell out what she meant by handled. She didn't need to. I said, "Thank you," and I meant it. What I've thought about most, looking back, isn't the dinner or the hallway or any of the particular moments. It's the early part. The months in Leslieville before any of this. The Tuesday evenings on the couch with burnt garlic bread and a bad movie when I was just a person and he was just a person, and neither of us was carrying anything that hadn't been chosen freely. I think about what my grandmother told me once, that a person's real character isn't what they show you when they know they're being watched. It's what they show you when they think it doesn't matter. She said it about being kind to servers, to doormen, to people whose approval you don't need. But it works the other way too. It's what other people show you when they think you have nothing, when they think you're someone they don't have to bother with. I remember standing in that kitchen in October, listening to a woman tell me I wasn't suited, thinking, "You have no idea." And I also remember thinking, I hope one day you get the chance to find out you were wrong. She did. And to her credit, real credit, the kind that actually cost something, she did something with that knowledge instead of just defending herself against it. That's the part I didn't expect. That's the part I'll keep.